So welcome everybody to this live broadcast. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. As much as we really do miss the physical events, I think this is the magic of virtual broadcasts like this. You can really connect the world. So on behalf of YoungShip UAE, we would like to welcome you to today's Fireside chat with a very distinguished guest, Mrs. Abeer Alshaali, who is the Deputy Managing Director of Gulfcrest. Welcome, Mrs. Alshaali, to our broadcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to participate in these events.
We're really looking forward to this fireside chat. It's kind of the first one for us, and we really want to aim at branding the UAE as a maritime cluster through YoungShip UAE. For those who might not know me, I'm Gina Panayiotou. I'm a board member of YoungShip UAE and the founder of Oceans Arena, and it's all about shipping. Acting as your host for the day, for today's broadcast. Just a few housekeeping stuff before I go on to introduce today's lovely guest, of course, and her bio. So the talk is streaming live on It's All About Shipping Facebook page. It would also be recorded and made available later on. It would last approximately 25 to 30 minutes, and we'll be taking some questions at the end. So feel free to drop in the comments any questions you have, any thoughts, or DM us, and we'll take them at the end. And of course, we do also have a very special announcement to make in collaboration with Gulfcrest at the end of the show. So do stay tuned. And without further ado, let me introduce you to this lovely guest that we have today, and who I'm really looking forward and very humbled to be in a fireside chat with. So Mrs. Alshaali was raised and educated in the United States of America. She always yearned to work in the family business, but after completing her bachelor's degree at Rice University in Houston, Texas, she joined HSBC to gain an initial experience. After her professional years with HSBC, Mrs. Alshaali took some time off to work to raise her own family. Later, she joined the Gulfcrest operations, working in the executive office and handling the management of the company alongside her father. She has successfully overseen the implementation of new processes to make the company more efficient and has been instrumental in improving the structure of the company. Mrs. Alshaali believes in a continuous learning and improving work ethic, and to that end, she's also currently pursuing her MBA. She encourages a cooperative work environment and sees industrial development as fundamental to the economic growth of the UAE, and she also encourages more involvement between the private and public sector, as she believes that there are many common goals that can be achieved together. She will be briefing us in a little bit more towards the end of today's program. And on a final note, Mrs. Alshaali is also a board member of the Anjum Media City Free Zone and serves as a mentor in the Sheikh Abdulaziz bin Humaid Leadership Program. Thank you again for accepting this invite so graciously. And without further ado, I'm sure a lot of people are quite familiar with Gulfcrest. It is the world's leading luxury yacht shipyard in the world, but it would be great if you could brief us in a bit more on what you do, the operations, and the company in general.
Sure. So again, thank you very much for having me, and it's always interesting to see people within the industry and to hear and discuss how different parts of the industry work, whether it's shipping or leisure marine. With regards to Gulfcrest, so we were established in 1982, so almost 40 years now, by our chairman, Mohammed bin Hussein Alshaali, and his partners. The board structures changed a little bit over the years, but we're still basically very similar. It really came out of a love for the sea and a passion. The company, because of the way that it was first established and where we are in the world geographically, we have had to be vertically integrated. So as you well know, in the world of shipping, everything goes in and out of the UAE, but not much is actually raw material, not much is actually from here. And so we have had to import raw materials and then manufacture. And so what that means is that the company has grown very organically. Over the years. We started with small runarounds in one facility in Ajman. We now have about, at our maximum, we had 4 facilities. We're now building another 2, but it kind of, goes up and down. We have the largest range of build in the world, from 31 feet up to our flagship 175-foot Majesty. And we've always said that we grow based on our clients' requirements. So we're very in touch with our clients, and that's what basically is the impetus for the growth in Gulfcraft. We try to do as much as we can in-house so that we can control as much as we can. But at the same time, in the last few years, we have been focusing, especially after COVID, we have been focusing on growing our partners in the Middle East and specifically in the UAE around us.
That's very interesting, actually, and it is one of the questions that I do have lying on app. But before we go on to how COVID has affected business strategies, and in particular, of course, Gulfcraft, you mentioned the Majesty projects, and I think a lot of people have seen probably the videos and how impressive the craft is. So maybe you can explain a little bit the process and you know, what it really takes for to deliver such a project as exclusive as the Majesty and the latest one.
So the Majesty 175 is a technical feat, and it's also a historic moment in the super yacht industry. It's not just about Gulfcraft. It's a historic moment for Gulfcraft, of course. But you know, at its core, it took resolution and it took grit, because before that, there had been here and there a few yachts built in composite, but the concept of taking composite, classing it at that size, took a lot of innovation, and it took a vision, you know, a willingness to go to that length. We worked very closely with our partners in the industry, whether that was with designers, whether it was with suppliers of glass, whether it was with the surveyors who had to come up with regulations that worked for that size in those materials. So prior to the 175, you didn't really have dedicated specifications for the, you know, for the survey, for the class, for composite at that gross tonnage. So we worked very, very closely on the technical details, materials, and worked out so that it would be a production yacht, not a one-off, with the support of other people in the industry.
It sounds like it was quite a challenging project, and it's very interesting actually to put things into perspective, because a lot of people surely don't think about the technicalities that it really takes for such a project to be put together. And it's actually why I was very excited about this chat, because I really wanted to go in depth of what it really is like to be building these yachts that we see and think are, you know, so glamorous. So in the first question, when you described Gulfcraft, you did say that we evolved as our clients, we grow based on our clients' needs. And from what I understand, that is what sets you apart, you would say?
Yeah, I think our range sets us apart. So as I said, we go from 31 feet to 175, and that's the largest range for any company in terms of, you know, being under one roof and under one brand. We are Gulfcraft. We have different lines. So we do the Majesty range, the Nomad range, the Oryx range, and the Silvercraft range. And each one of those is dedicated to a little bit of a different market, but they are all under one corporate name, which is Gulfcraft. And I think what sets us apart is, besides the range, that we have an agility. And so we're able to kind of, for lack of a better word, pivot when needed. And also our people. So we have an open dialogue with our people. Our chairman, our execs, they're all present every day. They're down on the production floor, and that presence gives us a connection. And it means we have this connection that allows us to really be agile in our decision making, in our production capabilities, and really move maybe with a quickness that you don't always find. We get the buy-in basically from the production floor.
Excellent. That sounds like a very good strategy and plan. So you have also been in the yachting sector for several years now, and you did mention COVID, of course, and there's a lot of things going on in the industry. How have you seen the market evolve?
You know, the market, it's like the tide, you know, comes in up. and yeah, it evolves, and you know what's happening in the economy has a huge effect. And what we see, the biggest effect of the economy is on mid-range boats. So the ones in the economy don't generally have a huge effect on super yachts, and they don't also generally have a huge effect on small fishing boats. Where you the effect is really in that mid-range size, where a person that's living on a fixed income has to make a decision whether or not they want to go forward with that purchase. So that's where we see the biggest effect in terms of what's happening within the economy. But also there's a cultural shift that happens, and that that also has an effect on the market. I think everyone in the industry is very well aware that with COVID, the market for boats is doing incredibly well. People need a space where they can feel safe and they can get out of the house, out of lockdown, and they can enjoy their time with their families and out in nature. And boats have been the answer to all of those things. So the market is doing incredibly well with regards to used and new boat sales, right after or during or after. I don't know if it's during or after COVID. I don't know where we are now on the timeline of COVID. The market now is very high. It wasn't a few years ago. And I think we just, you have to kind of stay your course and make sure that you kind of chug along and you do well in the good years. And then you plan for the low years. The charter market has definitely been a huge boost as well. So I think charter is definitely, has a huge effect on the market.
Definitely, yes. That's thank you very much for that. Another, I would say, rising trend or demand over the past few years is obviously sustainability and greener initiatives. So greener pleasure crafts, greater decarbonization regulations, stricter regulations, a shift towards automation, technologically advanced vessels. So a lot of disruption going on in the industry. In what respect do you feel that Gulf Crest is adapting its strategy?
So when it comes to sustainability, there are two tracks. There's the what you do with regards to your manufacturing facilities, and what you do with regards to the final product, that you sell into the market. So as a manufacturer, what you want to do is reduce waste first and foremost. Second, you want to reduce carbon emissions in your production facility, and you want your facility to run in the most efficient way possible with the least, shall we say, damage to the environment around you. So at Gulfcraft, we have a few different things we do. One, we are actually sitting on a creek that is an environmentally protected area. And so we're always very, very clear to keep that creek clean. And that's been something that we've been doing for years and years. The other things that we do is we're looking at, we do things like recycle wherever we can the materials that we're using, whether it's acetone or other chemicals. And there are a lot of, when you're working with composites, you're going to get chemical waste. We try to reduce waste by being as efficient as possible with our materials. But then we're also looking at things like reducing the amount of air conditioning that we have to do by using smarter systems. We're looking at putting in solar panels. We're looking at changing the paint on the factory to make the buildings cooler. So there's a few different things that we're doing, across the production facility to reduce as much as possible and to try to create a more sustainable environment. With regards to the products themselves, it comes down to everything from the design of the hull, so that the hull is more efficient and uses less propulsion power, and so therefore uses less fuel, to actually looking at the way that we do propulsion, whether it's moving towards solar powered propulsion, whether it's moving towards different types of electric or hydro, and there's a few different things and ways that we're looking at it. Setup of the battery power and how the batteries are recharged. There's a lot of technical details about that, but then there's also the materials that we use on board. So we're using more sustainable materials. We're using materials where we can trace the supply chain and make sure that they're properly sourced. That's one of the things that we're doing. And the other one is actually the automated power management systems, and that gives you greater efficiencies overall. So the more automation you have and the more your systems are integrated, the better control you have, and therefore you can reduce waste and you can be more efficient. I'm going on and on in this question because it really is a huge issue right now. There's, as you guys well know, there are a lot of rules coming out now from the IMO. And Gulfcraft has even signed on to the Clean Water Initiative to donate back into this issue, because it is a really important thing for our company.
No, definitely, and I believe that going forward, all of the things that you mentioned, and there's this focus and emphasis, and it's just something that's here to stay, and companies need to adjust in the way that things are being made. So you touched on quite a few things, especially the note on automation at the end, which is quite interesting. But what do you feel from your personal experience will be or has been the greatest game changer when it comes to either the final product or the strategy? Or
that's a tough question, because the wonderful thing about our industry is, a boat can be as simple as a canoe, or it can be as complicated as one of those, shipping ships. It's this huge range of what a boat is. And so what has been the game changer? I think I said earlier that the charter has a huge effect on the market. And I still think that maybe that is something that changed the game a little bit, because, in the 70s and the 80s and even the 90s, you could only really buy a super yacht. I'm talking specifically about super yachts if you could afford to put the cash in. There wasn't an ability to participate in yachting if you didn't have the money for it. Buying into the charter market, so that you buy a yacht as a business and put it up for charter, and cover the maintenance cost, cover some of the running costs, move it around the world, and actually run it as a business is becoming, or has become, a viable way to own a yacht. And it's really opened up the market to people who would not have purchased yachts otherwise. So I think that was a game changer when it came to yachting. I think there's a lot of technical stuff that has really helped yachts move forward, whether it's down to the navigation, whether it's down to technology when it comes to propulsion, when it comes to the engines. But one big change, it's hard to define as this one thing that, changed the game. I think charter, and who knows if we're going to see that change the game even further with fractional ownership or something along those lines. It still hasn't, I've yet to see where it really works, but I think going forward, we may start to see that a little bit. We don't know, but that's possibly the next step, the way that you do with jets, or the way that you do even with small boats. So, that's what I think. We'll keep an eye out on that one.
Very interesting, Ria. I know it's a tough question. That's probably why I included it in the agenda, but it's very interesting to hear. I mean, you've got so much experience, so coming from you is quite important. So the next question I'm going to go into is a bit more regional, and we briefly touched upon it in our discussions leading on to this fireside chat. So you're based in the UAE, you're a yacht builder, super yacht builder based in the UAE. So maybe you can share with us like a few of the real challenges and maybe even the blessings of being located in the region.
So yeah, the UAE has kind of an amazing peculiarity. We have something like 200 different nationalities living here. It's a great testing space. You really can feel the pulse of the world. I recently heard that it's a great place for tech companies to test new apps and new software because of the variety of people that live here. And, it's a great place to mine data. The GCC, at the same time that it has this variety of nationalities, is also the highest concentration of ultra high net worth individuals in the world. And that also gives us another kind of peculiarity, because this is where you would think this is the best place to sell a super yacht. it's a high value asset, and Dubai is all about luxury, and it works. It's a very positive thing to be here and to have that connection with the local market. The difficulties, or let's say the challenges, really come just with regards to supply chain. We are at the center of boat manufacturing. So if I go through our suppliers, maybe we have a large number, 500, 600 suppliers. I think something like 30% are based in Italy. So it gives you a kind of an idea how far away we are from the center of manufacturing when it comes to our industry, let alone kind of manufacturing in the world. So it's not an industrial nation. The infrastructure is not set up for industry very much. So logistics is a major issue. And what that means is you have to factor in a long lead time. So whether it's regarding production, whether it's regarding after sales, you just have to factor in a little bit more when it comes to your planning. And that can be a little bit challenging. The good thing is, of course, that we have some major ports in the country, and the UAE is a central kind of stop for many shipping companies. And that's not really the problem. The problem is just being so far away and having to wait for things. You can't just sample something and then say, all right, the sample passed our testing. That process is just very long. Other than that, I think not being a nation that really focuses too much in the past on industry, having been here for 40 years, we sort of over the years have had to have a lot of discussions with government officials along the way to kind of tell them what we need. The good thing is that door is always open. That's the really positive thing about the UAE, is that the government is accessible and responsive, and that's been a great help. We've got a lot of support.
That actually smoothly leads into what I had in mind for the next question. But just quickly, another thing that comes to my mind, I mean, also, what about with the heat element and aspect of building the super yachts in the UAE climate? Would be quite interesting to know.
Oh yeah, we have the highest heat, the highest salinity, and the highest humidity. So we've had many situations where we test a yacht and we're getting, say, 24 knots. And then it goes into the Mediterranean, or it goes to California or something like that, and all of a sudden they're getting 27 knots, and they're surprised. You guys told us 24. And said, yeah, 24 in the Gulf, not 24 in the Med. The water is different. The product behaves differently. We've had situations where equipment is working perfectly fine in the UK. It gets shipped and installed here. It doesn't work anymore. Gets shipped back, still working perfectly fine in the UK. They send it back here, we install it, doesn't work. And it's back and forth until we discover it's the heat. The metal is expanding, and that system that functioned perfectly well in the UK doesn't function in the UAE anymore. It's actually a great place to test new systems. And we've had suppliers that have asked us to do some testing on our boats because they figure if they can get it to work in our, will work anywhere else. And what we tell our clients, and that used to be our slogan years ago, was we know our water better. So if you are in the Gulf and you want to buy a boat, come check us out. We know the water here.
That was actually something I was very curious about from the beginning, and I also think our audience, and quite fascinating to hear how that really works with such heat, and quite a challenge from what I understand from your side.
Yeah.
And as we're approaching the closing of the broadcast, and you mentioned earlier the collaboration between private and public sector, it also says in your bio that you really feel industrial development is key. Maybe you can share a few words on what the UAE Maritime has to offer, and how private and public cooperation can support the cluster more, or any other thoughts on that?
I think we've come a long way. So I don't want to be negative in what I have to say. I think that there's been a lot of dialogue over the past few years to get kind of the government to understand And we talk in two ways with the government. We talk to the government as a manufacturer and what our requirements are in terms of industry and infrastructure, what, you know, fees and regulations and things of that sort. And then we also talk in favor of our clients and what they're requesting. You know, they would like clearer regulations, easier access, easier sailing permits, more services in the marinas. So there's a, you know, there's a lot of different discussions that are taking place. And what I found is that when the government can move quickly, they do, if there's something that they can change. And I'll give you an example. We had a situation in which we discovered yachts that come in as visiting yachts are only given a short amount of time for their crew. And firstly, the visa for the crew and the visa for the yacht, the actual asset, were not linked. And so they were different timelines. I think one was 3 months and one was 6 months, something along those lines. So that was something that we raised and was immediately rectified. So there was definitely a good response for the government. The other part that we had an issue with is being who we are in Asia, we are your best bet for service if you have a super yacht, regardless of whether it's Gulf craft or not. We do services, we do maintenance, we do refit, actually, whether it's sail, catamaran, motor yacht, we do the whole thing. And so we have had yachts, visiting yachts coming in from other parts of Asia, whether it's in the GCC or even in, you know, other places, that have had difficulty because the amount of time required to do the refit, the yacht would not have finished the actual, the yacht would not still be legal in the UAE. So it would have had to exit and re-enter, but you can't do that in the middle of a refit. So we raised this with the government, and this is something that they looked at, and they changed some of the regulations with regards to visiting yachts entering the UAE. So when you can get that kind of response for a government, especially if it's something that's within the power of people to change quickly, I think that that's a really good sign. What we hope for going forward is to get, you know, better services within marinas, easier regulations, and there's a few things here and there, but it's really about tweaking, you know, getting an all-encompassing GCC yacht code. There's a few things, and I think we have the International Super Yacht Summit coming up. We'll definitely be discussing some of those things.
I was about to say, it's generally a very positive note, and it's very encouraging to hear that the collaboration stream is good, because it's quite vital when you're growing a cluster, especially in the shipbuilding aspect. But yes, as Mrs. Alshaali said, that this will be discussed in more detail in the International Super Yacht Summit next week, if I'm not mistaken. So for whoever is interested, they can follow more details there. On that note, I'm finished with my questions, and a couple of questions have come through from the audience, which seem to be quite interested also on the finance aspects. So whether you're seeing more financing and also green financing at Gulfcraft.
So our clientele has been looking at financing, but when you're looking at super yachts, many of the individuals or the clientele that looks at super yachts come with their own people and their own structure. So we're not always privy to that. They'll come to us having already secured that through their own channels. But definitely there are a lot who will finance their purchases. I haven't yet seen a lot of green financing in within our clientele, but I do know that many of our clientele, yes, they are taking out financing options. Interestingly, I haven't seen it too much on the smaller boats, more on the super yacht purchases. Smaller boats, there's been a lot less of that.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you so much for that. And because yeah, well, I mean, my thought would be that probably when it's a super yacht, it's probably part also of a group structure, so the financing is more realistic in that respect. And another final question is, if there has been like the greatest challenge that you have faced as a shipbuilder in the UAE, a super yacht shipbuilder?
The greatest challenge. Oh, that's a good question. I think the challenge has been more to do with always wanting to do more, not having enough hours in the day. Is that too cliche of an answer? That's probably a cliche answer, but I think there's always a hunger. There's always, we got to do this. We want to go there. We want to be this. We want to do that. And it's frustrating to us. I think geographically where we're located, it can be frustrating because we want to be able to take our 175 around the world, but logistics, and at the end of the day, the client is the client, and there've been so many times where we've really been so proud of a boat and we want to show it to the whole world, but it is an incredibly private purchase, so you have to respect that. So that sometimes has been a source of frustration, and I completely respect and understand that, but that's been sometimes a source of frustration. And I think it's always we want to do more. We want to share what we have with everybody. And I'm sorry to be so cliche, but that's sort of been more of the challenge, because the technical stuff is technical and you get through it and you move on, and the logistics and the supply chain, and why can't this piece fit into this piece, and organizational structure, and people have come and gone, and that's life, that's normal. But there's always the hunger, the want to kind of stand at the mountaintop and shout. And I think that's where we kind of feel the frustration sometimes.
No, I wouldn't say that's a cliche answer at all, not at least for somebody who's very passionate, and we can really see that you're truly passionate about this, and this has been such a great discussion. I really don't want it to end, but I also understand you're very busy, and I think we've covered quite a few interesting topics. So on that note, we'll have to slowly wrap up today's broadcast. Thank you so much for being with us, Ms. Alshaali.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a very, very enlightening discussion. If you did not catch the whole thing, it will be available on replay. Just a few thanks before we close, of course, to our distinguished guests for so graciously accepting the invite. We also want to thank the 100+ YoungShip UAE members. Yes, we're growing and it's great. The organizing team for making this possible, and of course, our media supporter, Marasi News, and supporters Mubarak Marine, Nimbo Legal, and Oceans Arena. And we did promise an announcement, and this is another thanks to Ms. Alshaali and the Gulf Crafts team, who will be hosting us in a tour on the premises in January. So that's a very exciting news. Make sure you stay tuned for full details, and follow YoungShip UAE on all social media as we announce the date and all the operational matters in that respect. Thank you again, Mrs. Alshaali. On a personal note, I would also like to thank, of course, the president of the association, Marwan Mubarak, and the immediate past president, Hari Krishna, for making me a part of YoungShip UAE team. And I was Gina Panayiotou, your host for your day. Thank you to everybody for joining, and see you at our next event. Thank you.